Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 40th ever episode of the Best Phone Plans Podcast. Today, we are joined by special guest Sascha Segan from PCMag. He's the lead mobile analyst, and you guys have been up to some really exciting stuff recently. But before we dive into that and the speed test results you've been working on, Sascha, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. We actually are on the road in Canada right now, so I've been in touch with our Canadian drivers working on those speed tests.
Wow. Multiple countries. Of course, we have Dennis here as well. Dennis, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing fantastic as always, and especially happy to have our good friend Sascha on. It's been too long.
Too long indeed. Well, Sascha, what I want to talk about today is PCMag's fastest mobile internet speed test results for 2021. Could you give us a brief background on what that initiative even is and how it got started at PCMag?
Yeah, we've been doing this, or I've been doing this since 2010, and it was a very different world then. There weren't a lot of other organizations out there doing speed tests and network measurement for the public back then. And it was just as 3G was starting to turn into 4G. And we asked, because our job at PCMag is to tell you, what to buy, what not to buy on an impartial basis. We wanted to go out there and test the claims that all the carriers were making. Everybody always says they have the best network. Everybody always says they have the fastest network. But we got the opportunity to go out there and start driving cities and see what the real results were and give people all the details on how the testing was done so that they could have a little more confidence in these results. Now, that first year, we had to go out there with laptops with PC cards in them. We were running a DOS script that I wrote, that was downloading web pages and timing them. And then, time goes on and we got some apps and we switched to Android. And now it's a whole thing where we do 30 cities every year in the US and we do 20 cities in Canada.
Wow.
That's awesome. Now, when you're doing the test, how do you figure out what device you're going to use going forward? Do you just do a general everybody? I'm just going to use iPhone because that's the most used phone in the U.S. Or do you pick it based off of something else, or how do you do the test?
Okay, so first of all, it has to be an Android phone because our app is an Android app.
Okay.
Then second of all, it has to have the latest Qualcomm modem, because we are trying to test the maximum capacity and performance of the networks. And so we want to make sure that we have the modem, which can take advantage of whatever the latest network capabilities are. And then ideally, we want the same phone model on every carrier. And back in the past, that used to be a little more complicated than it is now. There used to be a lot.
Different variants with each carrier, I remember.
Exactly.
Samsung was the most guilty of that.
Especially between that 2012 to 2015 range, nailing down which phone to use that would be the same on every carrier was a little difficult. For the past couple of years, we've just used whatever the latest Galaxy flagship is.
Sweet. So, yeah, what did your setup look like for this year? It sounds like you had probably the S21, I'm imagining. And what did you do to do 5G and LTE? Because now we're kind of in one of those split years where we've got both technologies that are very prevalent.
Yeah, it was important to us to separately test 5G and LTE to see what the difference is. There's a lot of, I've been writing stories about should you turn on 5G, should you turn off 5G, what is more advantageous. And so we needed to test the network separately to find that out. And so, yeah, we got a bunch of small S21s, and there's a great little app called Samsung Band Selector that you can use to block 5G.
I use that app quite frequently.
Yep. So we've got the 5G phones, and they're in the default mode, and we've got the 4G phones where we use Band Selector to force them into LTE only mode. Now, the Verizon phone kept on trying to jump back up to 5G, because Verizon does that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so one of our driver's instructions was keep an eye on that and, push it back down if you have to. Drown it in the tub. Yeah. So we had that going. And now the SIM cards. So there is no consumer service plan which would tolerate the kind of usage we do. Okay. We are consuming literally terabytes over the course of this monstrosity.
Well,
Yeah, I
would
remember.
the new Magenta Max and AT&T Elite plans work? Like, is this something that's starting to become a possibility, or still no?
Yeah, like this is the first year where, in theory, that would be a possibility. But realistically, so our tests to the AIs in the network systems, our tests look like abuse.
Ah,
Yeah, there's no way, Stetson. What would happen is because basically his tests are almost like a DDoS attack. Like he's literally rapidly doing speed tests.
Well, I'm doing
Right,
one every
no-
2 minutes. I'm not like so if you do one more than every 2 minutes, the phone overheats.
Okay.
So that's its
so
own problem.
smart. So
You
you're
have to
like
let the
taking
phones
that
cool
into
down.
consideration.
Yeah.
There's
Oh,
so many things.
we had years when phones would overheat. We had to put them on ice packs. We had to bracket them to the air conditioning vents in the cars and turn the AC all the way up, and the drivers were wearing their coats. But yeah, so now like it's a little more efficient with the phones, and as long as you only run them like 30 seconds out of every 2 minutes, the phone doesn't overheat. But going to Dennis's point, it still kind of looks like a DDoS attack, so we need to get special SIM cards.
Yeah. Now, I remember this from last time, but I do have a question, though. You said you were using Android phones, which I totally understand because it gives you a lot more granular control, like having that band select, for example, that you talked about being able to be used. But, have you guys thought about using iPhones, considering that that is the most used phone, generally speaking, at least in North America overall?
iPhones will not give the modem diagnostics that we need for our results.
Gotcha. Even if what if you just did like something simple though, like a simple like just normal speed test, doesn't have to be super fancy, just to be like, hey, this network's the best for iPhone, because we've seen that Apple phones tend, except for this year, tend to perform worse than their Android counterparts.
iPhones can't even reliably tell us whether they're on 4G or 5G.
This is
Like,
true.
We
and a little
just can't
disappointing.
get the diagnostics through the APIs to make that test useful to us in terms of big data.
Dang.
Sasha,
Gotcha.
you teased on Twitter that you're going to have an article about the new iPhone 13 killer 5G feature. Will it be telling us whether or not we're actually on 5G?
It's the iOS 15. You're talking about iOS 15 with the new revamped service mode, right?
Oh, I wish. Wouldn't that be great?
Oh my gosh.
That's
Yeah,
not the
no.
that's not the killer feature.
No. I have to save something for my column tomorrow. Okay, the column's going out at 10 a.m., but it's a Qualcomm X60 modem thing. That's the
Well,
one thing.
what
I'll
if
say.
we publish this podcast after tomorrow at 10 a.m.?
Then I will tell you what it is.
We can do that.
Okay. So the most interesting 5G feature that the X60 modem brings is extending 5G coverage by allowing for 5G mid to low band carrier aggregation.
Whoa.
And the reason for this is that basically your phone strains on upload and not download. Transmit rather than receive is where all of the energy and radiation and power are going. So so you want to use a lower band for transmit than you do for receive, because lower bands go further with less energy being used. Now, the previous iPhones could not combine mid and low band 5G. You could have mid band 5G, but then for that low band carrier, you had to use 4G. It was non-standalone. You had to use 4G. And that increases latency, but it would also potentially reduce coverage because I don't know if you know, but in a lot of places, the 5G and 4G sectors on cell sites are somewhat misaligned with each other. And so the 4G sector is not aligned to give the optimal uplink distance for the 5G sector. Whereas the way the carriers are installing mid and low band 5G together, typically when they do that, they are aligned better. And so when you get to a point where you can do standalone and you can do a low band 5G uplink with that mid band 5G downlink, you're going to get increased range as well as lower latency. And probably better battery life out of not doing NSA either.
Wow.
So a lot of good stuff coming.
That's
Mostly next
spectacular.
year as the carriers turn C-band on.
Yeah, yeah, and this is going to be in the newer iPhones this year?
Yeah, this will be in the 13s.
Wow. Very exciting news. Thank you for that sneak peek, Sascha. Of course, it'll be out already by now, so we'll link to that article in the video description. But I want to take it back to the coverage and the scores that you guys were creating for your Fastest Mobile Network initiative. What were some of the results you were seeing, and what surprised you from what these drivers were pulling in from these speed tests?
So the number one result is that T-Mobile mid-band 5G blows everything else away right now. If you can get T-Mobile mid-band 5G, which means that you are in a large to mid-sized city, it just like torches the competition, like comical levels.
Yeah.
Okay. The two things I was surprised by, which were not good, were one, I was really surprised at how little millimeter wave coverage we saw. And some of that was that our testing is done inside a car. And millimeter wave is so fragile that even just being in a metal box reduces the coverage. So I think we somewhat underestimated millimeter wave coverage by being in a car, but still there was just less than we expected. The other thing which surprised me, which wasn't good, is that AT&T 5G is a disaster area right now, and they really have to get their act together.
What do you mean by disaster area? I mean, it sounded like, they flipped the 5G icon on. They almost had 5G first with 5GE. What could be going on with that?
Yeah, I don't know. There's some kind of misconfiguration going on, like with Verizon DSS last year. Okay, so when Verizon turned on DSS last year, immediately 5G was slower than 4G?
Yes, and they were like, turn off 5G to save battery life and actually get faster speeds. Oops.
Yes. Okay, so that turned out to be a really complicated network misconfiguration that even I cannot properly explain. Verizon engineers have tried to explain it to me. It is too technical for me, but the upshot is they fixed it. And so now the Verizon 5G is nominally faster than the 4G. But AT&T, they've got something going on where when the phones are attaching to 5G, what I think it is, my suspicion, because AT&T won't say, is that there's a lot of places. Okay, so AT&T is using 5x5 megahertz of band 5 for 5G. And there's a lot of places where AT&T has 10 by 10 megahertz of either band 12 or band 14, which are other low bands. You cannot aggregate two of those bands. You cannot aggregate two low bands. Ah. So when it's switching to the 5x5 of 5G, it's dropping 10 by 10 of either 12 or 14. And so you're ending up with a 5G experience which is on less spectrum and is less fast than the LTE. 4G experience. AT&T's 4G is great.
You can aggregate everything on LTE, combine those for a superior upload-download experience.
And, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Sascha, you are actually 100% correct. As a person that lives in a market that has five-way carrier aggregation from AT&T, which is beautiful, when I'm connected to 5G, you are correct. It drops carrier aggregation on the low bands. But ironically enough, at least in my market, 5G helps out my uplink. So I actually get higher upload speeds when connected to 5G versus the five-way carrier ag on the LTE sector. Ironically enough, I have my iPhone 12 Pro Max in the other room, which I can grab, but I've ran speed tests on here before. I was able to get like Stetson. What was the highest peak? 70 meg.
Oh gosh, yeah.
70 meg on the upload, and like 400 on the down.
Dennis is in a good AT&T market.
Yeah, the wild card, of course, is congestion.
Yeah, actually, I have a question about that. A lot of plans we see from the carriers say 50 gigs of priority data or premium data, as they like to call it. The newer plans do come with unlimited. A lot of MVNOs and prepaid carriers that I tend to recommend for their low-cost affordability, they do tend to be deprioritized. What's your take on that? Does being deprioritized impact the network experience? How much do you think it does? Is it worth considering an unlimited premium plan right now?
I mean, I don't have a lot of experience testing the MVNO priority levels. That's really your zone, and that's like something I look to you for information about, the MVNO priority levels.
Yeah, sure.
Definitely, like the formal, you've hit your soft cap, we are going to deprioritize you to hell, postpaid stuff can be really harsh. And I've seen some studies out of I think it was OpenSignal, who saw a lot of people being dropped to 1 to 5 megabits.
Yeah, because it goes from like on a ranking of 1 to 4, you go from basically like 1 to 4 in that scenario. Whereas the prepaid customers I've found typically are on like 2, and they just stay at 2, and they have capped data plans, so they just run out of data and you get slowed to 2G speeds.
Right. And so, like, what kinds of speeds, like, I'll ask you, what kinds of performance are you seeing from people on those levels 2 and 3, rather than, like, I'm always talking to people who are, I'm always testing things that are on either 4 or 1, not in the middle.
Well, Stetson, you did that. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I did. I've done tons of tests on this, because who would be crazy enough to sign up with 4 different plans from T-Mobile to put these to the test? Answer is I am. I found that each network handles it a little differently. T-Mobile was probably the most aggressive. I found your Magenta Max with priority data was getting, let's say it got 100% speed performance. I found the drop-off went from 100% to 30% for the first, going from tier 1 to tier 2. And then tier 2 to tier 3 went from 30% to like 15% of the speeds. So pretty huge drop-off there. And then I think AT&T was a little bit better. It was around 100% for AT&T Elite on priority, and then it dropped to, I think, around 50 to 65% for your second level, which is going to be extra T-Mobile or AT&T prepaid and a lot of the MVNOs. And then it kind of dropped from there to, I think, around 30%. So a little bit better, I think, on AT&T. Verizon, I think they were around 50%. You were priority at 100 and then 50% speed when deprioritized.
Now, with T-Mobile, were you primarily on 4G in that experience, or were you on mid-band 5G at all?
I was only on 4G when I think I did that test.
Well, that would explain why they're throttling so heavily, because one of the things that I discovered in my test, which nobody who, like, this won't be a surprise to anyone who follows the market, but AT&T has right now a ton of 4G capacity. They are great on 4G capacity right now. Their 5G is essentially a lie. T-Mobile is feeling pretty constrained in the 4G realm right now, but they have a ton of empty 5G capacity. And as soon as you get into, it's like switching to the express lanes of the highway. Going to mid-band 5G on T-Mobile.
Yeah.
So if you were on that T-Mobile 4G network, it makes sense to me that T-Mobile would be more restrictive just because that's not where they have their capacity.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly what we were seeing. And I think Verizon overall is just congested. And yeah, I guess this kind of brings me to the next question. Like, what improvements do you think these networks can make? Like, what could T-Mobile be doing to make their network better? What could Verizon be doing? What could AT&T be doing? I'm sure they've got different strengths and different weaknesses right now. Where do you think we could see these networks improve going forward, end of 2021 into 2022?
So there's a couple of changes coming, especially on Verizon and AT&T. So when AT&T does their 3G shutoff, that's going to let them use more Band 5 for 5G. So that'll help them get rid of the problem they have right now, where the Band 5 5G is slower than low-band 4G.
Right.
So the 3G shutoff will help AT&T with that. And then, of course, early next year, Verizon and AT&T both flip the switch on C-band.
Yes.
And we are expecting great things. Don't let us down, guys. We are expecting great things.
It'll be epic.
At least in 46 markets.
Now, what about millimeter wave? I mean, are we getting excited for that? Do you think that's going to be a pivotal thing in the 5G race, or not so much?
So I've been hearing a real refocusing around millimeter wave to millimeter wave is really a venue and campus solution. The idea of covering entire cities with millimeter wave, somebody sold Verizon a bill of goods in 2018. Okay. I'm not gonna point any direct fingers, but I don't think that is I don't think that's viable. But where you have crowds of thousands of people, that's where millimeter wave becomes handy. Right on, in Times Square, in a football stadium, on on the center of the campus of the University of Texas, at a really popular beach resort. So millimeter wave is going to hit those zones where otherwise the congestion would just be impossible.
So I have a spicy take on millimeter wave, and I want to hear your opinion on it, see if it makes sense. I was thinking that instead of each carrier individually deploying millimeter wave, someone like a Comcast or a Spectrum ends up deploying millimeter wave in all these little places where they have the hotspots and just rents that capacity out to the carriers.
I mean, the shared network concept in general is something that a lot of people try to float in various contexts pretty frequently. And it's not, I mean, the problem is it ends up needing smart regulation and like trust in regulators and trust in a system to set reasonable prices in the absence of competition. And I fear that we do not have that in America right now. You know, there's not enough trust to make this work without feeling like somebody's going to be ripping somebody off.
Gotcha. Sure. I mean, the only reason why I had that idea is just because, at least here in Pittsburgh, for example, Comcast has their hotspots. They're literally all over the place. So, and they own some spectrum to a certain extent. All they'd have to do is just yank that Wi-Fi hotspot off the pole, put on a small cell, bada bing, bada boom, there's millimeter wave. And then, you know, ISPs are like Verizon's talking about replacing home internet with this wireless solution, right? Well, Comcast could do the same thing in like these like really rural parts of America where it doesn't make sense to run all this coaxial cable, right? So it's like a mutually beneficial win-win-win. And the same way that carriers roam off of U.S. cellular in the U.S. out west, for example, or other roaming agreements happen domestically, I could see something like that happening for millimeter wave, since it doesn't really make sense for AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile to all have their small cells on that same little utility pool. You know what I mean?
No, you're absolutely right. But the problem isn't like, if everybody was a completely cooperative, rational actor, this kind of thing would happen. But I think we're just in a business climate and in a social and political situation where there just isn't the possibility of people working together on a reasonable basis like this.
Sure. Sascha, where do you think millimeter wave plays a role in the fixed wireless solutions? Like, do you think we'll see AT&T start to do something with that? Where does it play a role in that? Is T-Mobile going to do anything with that?
I mean, T-Mobile says they are. Neville has absolutely said flat out that he's going to start using millimeter wave for home internet sometime between now and 2024. So it's definitely on the agenda. I think the issue with T-Mobile is that they right now have, as we've been saying, a ton of unused mid-band capacity. But as the iPhone 13s and the iPhone 14s come on and they all have mid-band, like one of the things we have to remember is that like only 15% of the iPhones in the market right now can use 5G, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so iPhone 13 will presumably move that up to 30 or 35%. And so once those phones are all using the T-Mobile mid-band, there won't be so much free capacity, and Neville will be like, okay, we're getting a little congested here. We got to put some millimeter wave in to serve the home customers, that sort of stuff.
Got it.
AT&T says that they're super committed to fiber builds.
Yeah. Are they even doing a fixed wireless solution? Like, their hotspot plans are terrible right now.
They've got rural LTE.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's only for areas where like there's no other like option like at all.
Yeah.
And it's like really bad. Like there's like a 300 gigabyte cap, I believe, on it, and the speeds are capped at like 10 megabits per second, I believe, or something like that.
Yeah. AT&T is at least publicly all in on wireline right now.
Yeah, their Uverse service is literally probably the best internet option if you can get their fiber. Probably the best option in the U.S. outside of like Google Fiber.
No, I'll fight you. I love my Fios.
I have Fios right now. I would actually prefer to have AT&T Uverse.
Really? Why?
Well, I don't want to get super long-winded. Maybe I'll talk to you about it behind the scenes, but I'll just say that my experience with Fios wasn't what I walked in expecting, and and I will just say the whole process of getting started was very painful. The tech that came out actually literally told me, I don't know why they sold me this. You really shouldn't be getting this. I'm not joking. And then when I did finally get set up with it, I had to wait like 3 weeks for them to bury the fiber line, and my latency was And meanwhile, the fiber is being ran over by like heavy like industry equipment because I'm in a new build house, right? And my latency was like double digits to like Fios's like speed test server. Like my Comcast connection was literally getting better ping times, which is not what I wanted.
Oh, right, because your fiber was all like broken and crumbly.
Well, even before it was broken and crumbly, like when it was first installed, I was having major problems. Now, it's better, but my main problem with Fios is that they forget that they're an ISP sometimes. Like they blacklist a ton of different IP addresses from different domain name servers. The name is slipping me right now, but there's one that is very commonly used by like a lot of different anime sites, and it also happens to be used by like bad actors. Instead of Fios taking like a scalpel approach and like whitelisting these good actors, they just blanketed the whole domain. So whereas like Comcast and other like ISPs aren't doing that, that's like really frustrating. And sometimes when they do these blanket bans of IP address bans, it affects other things, like for example my work from home. So that's a very frustrating experience. I'd argue it's almost like censorship to a certain extent. I get why Verizon's doing it. There's probably security concerns. They probably don't want their customers doing X, Y, and Z. But I don't know. I don't feel like they should be blacklisting like straight up bulk IP addresses. And I know you can get around.
So PCMag has this great story called the Best VPNs.
Look, I use NordVPN. It's great. And
I think that's actually our choice. So there you go.
Don't get me wrong. It's great. But VPNs inherently have their own issues. Like,
no, I know.
You gotta trust them to collect your because people think VPNs make you surprisingly anonymous on the internet. No, you're just basically trading your ISP having your data to having your VPN collecting your data. Right?
Hey, I'm just trying to get the VPN review guy to buy me a beer when he sees this.
Okay. Sorry.
Yes, we all love VPNs. Links in the description.
Anyway, I didn't mean to get us too sidetracked. Look, fiber's great. I'm just saying AT&T, in my opinion, is the better fiber provider in the U.S. for various reasons. But that's off the topic. Let's go back to mmWave talk. So we were talking about T-Mobile, right? We were talking about them using mid-band right now for their home internet customers and the possibility of deploying mmWave. Well, here's a hot take. How about T-Mobile doing fiber to the home? We saw them experimenting that with partnering up with Pilot out of Manhattan. Do you think T-Mobile might?
No. That would be a big no.
That's a
T-Mobile
hard
is
no.
not going to lay fiber through streets into people's houses. But what I think is really interesting about that the pilot program, which cracks me up. Okay, they've got a pilot program with Pilot. Hey, okay. So what I think is interesting about the pilot program is that what they're doing is they're taking an existing enterprise fiber provider, okay, that does not have a consumer brand or a consumer sales and support team. And what they're saying is, we will be your, we'll white label you, we'll be your sales and support team. And that is a direction that if this works out in these couple of buildings in Manhattan, however many buildings in Manhattan they're doing, if that works out, I could see T-Mobile trying to replicate that in other cities, using other using other enterprise fiber providers, especially if, and now I'm going to go to a really weird hot take, especially if post-COVID we see cities starting to convert office buildings into residential.
Wow.
Because if a lot of people are not returning to the offices they tend not to be returning to are the fanciest downtown office buildings. That is where the people who are now working from home would have been working. Okay, and the fanciest downtown office buildings have this enterprise fiber. And, sometimes it's Spectrum or Comcast, and they know how to sell to consumers, whatever. But sometimes it's Pilot or Atlantic Telenetworks or some other company that does not know how or want to sell to consumers. And if these buildings start reformatting as apartment buildings, I can totally see T-Mobile coming in and talking to these guys and saying, hey, Atlantic Telenetworks, you do not want to have to deal with whiny consumers at all hours, but we've got T-Force. They can tweet at us, you know.
Yeah, no, I actually think that would be a likely thing of them partnering up with these enterprise companies. But my other spicy take on it was that when T-Mobile acquired Sprint, they got all that sweet fiber backbone from the Sprint acquisition. Like, Sprint was a big tier 1 player in the U.S., and I was just thinking that T-Mobile might have a lot of like dark fiber just laying about that.
I don't think they have. The problem is I don't think they have last half mile. And the Sprint backbone is one thing, and backbone is great, and backbone is going to help somewhat with T-Mobile's backhaul problem. And T-Mobile has a backhaul problem. But the problem isn't the problem isn't the arteries, it's the capillaries.
Right, it's that last mile.
Exactly, and that's what costs zillions of dollars to build and requires an infinite number of permits and gets shot down by the community board.
Right.
Interesting.
But I was going to... Oh, sorry.
Well, I just wanted to jump back. What is T-Mobile's backhaul problem right now?
So T-Mobile's backhaul problem is because they don't own their own fiber. They do not have what I would consider to be big enough fiber lines going into some of their mid-band installations.
And how is that impacting the network? Is that
how that's impacting the network is that 80 gigahertz of mid-band can probably do about 1.2 gigabits. We're seeing speeds around here of maybe 750 megabits, which is still good.
It's like just over half, though.
They're running up against a wall because they have gig fiber into these sites. And so they aren't able to use... And they have more than 80 megahertz, okay, of midband. They aren't able to make the most of their spectrum without improving the fiber capacity of these sites. And fiber is more expensive for T-Mobile than for Verizon and AT&T because T-Mobile typically has to buy or rent someone else's fiber as opposed to Verizon and AT&T supplying their own fiber.
Got it. So T-Mobile needs to basically pay a lot of money to get more fiber to these sites to expand capacity, but they probably won't do that because their 5G network still has capacity right now until we get more and more people on the new iPhones, we get more and more T-Mobile home internet customers, and more people on the 5G network eating up that capacity.
Yeah, I mean, Neville Ray, never bet against Neville Ray. Okay, he is absolutely not dumb, and he does look forward. But he's making a judgment here where he's saying that, like, in my neighborhood right now, he's saying that people don't need more than 750.
It's probably right.
Exactly, he's probably right.
Right. Yeah, and we see our friend Peter on Twitter is always like, what's the killer 5G app? And the answer right now is like the Ookla speed test app.
Yes.
Wow.
Now, I was in Canada last week, and the Canadian carriers were selling me some decent potential 5G use cases.
Wow. Are you able to share a couple?
Oh yeah, definitely. So the one that I found the most interesting was I was at lunch with Bell, and they were talking about how they had put 80 cameras around the perimeter of the Bell Center in Montreal, which is it's hockey and concerts, and they have a 5G application, which also is going to use mobile edge compute, that lets you as a viewer pan around the stadium seamlessly.
Wow.
Basically smoothly moving from camera to camera as if you can just walk the perimeter of the rink.
No way.
Yeah, and they said it's not about bandwidth, it's about latency.
Are these cameras pointing in on the arena to see the action, or are they... Wow. So you're basically getting like... It's like an inverted version of Google Maps where you're on Street View and you can look around. This is, you're on the outside looking in, spinning the arena around in front of you.
Exactly. And so they say, and this isn't something like this is just something they were talking about at lunch. Okay, I have not done a full test of this application, but they say that you want to be like below like 12 milliseconds latency, so that it doesn't feel like there's lag when you drag. Yeah. Otherwise, it feels like there's lag when you drag. And if you want to be able to guarantee that latency, then you need 5G.
Wow.
So real quick though, I want to backpedal just a minute. So we were talking about the capacity thing, right? Like the whole people don't need 750 megabits per second or more than 750 megabits per second. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that though. Like well, hear me out real quick.
Okay.
Dennis, are you getting a camera array in your apartment? Is that what's happening?
No, that's not my issue. My issue is this. So T-Mobile's trying to sell home-based wireless internet, correct?
Yes.
I would say your typical person, your typical household, probably wants to at least see over 100 megabits per second consistently.
Yes.
So if you have 750, right, and there's like say six me's, right? I am gonna, and I'm using it for home internet. I am gonna destroy that network and make it unusable for any cell phone provider. Like, I'm literally going to destroy it. I'm going to have a game downloading on my computer that's like 100 gigabytes in size, and I'm going to assume 5 other versions of me are also going to have a game downloading. All the while I'm waiting, I'm going to be streaming 4K Netflix and expecting this to just work properly without any buffering and be done, right? Like, that's the kind of home internet experience I expect.
And now you have, so right there, you have like 3 challenges for T-Mobile for 2022. Okay, so AT&T's challenge for 2022 is make their 5G not suck. Right,
make actual 5G.
Right. Verizon's challenge for 2022 is get over the congestion. T-Mobile's challenge for 2022 is keep up with the massive increases in demand that they're going to see through buying and renting more fiber, as we've been talking about, through switching home internet customers over to mmWave if necessary, as we've been talking about. Through network slicing, which is something we haven't talked about, which is coming next year. And that'll make it so that there's always a chunk of the network available for the mobile customers, no matter how hard the home customers are trying to bogart it.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, basically the way I look at it's like this, is every cell tower should have 10 gig networking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Available, minimum.
Yeah.
And the reason why I look at it's like this is because if you look at how, I hate to always bring up cable, but if you look at how a cable network works, right? They do fiber to the node. It's probably 10 gig to that node, and it's being shared out to like maybe 500 subscribers, roughly, right? But it all works out because they're doing it smart, right? Like, not everybody's consistently downloading like, at the same time. Like you talked about with network splicing, it can help, and I'm sure cable has something similar to that they probably do. But they have plenty of bandwidth there nonetheless, even if the worst case did happen, so that if there was some type of minimum speed, no one would realistically notice, right? And T-Mobile can't do that right now, not with their current execution. Like, I've seen N4100 megahertz, and as we talked about with Backhaul, my cell site is not ready to handle the peak of what 100 megahertz could do. I capped somewhere around 300 meg. And it's just like, why even put it up, right? I wish T-Mobile would learn from AT&T with their one-touch policy that they do, where they literally upgrade everything all at once instead of having to revisit it multiple times throughout the year. Because every time T-Mobile visits a cell site, they're taking it down, reduces the coverage, and it causes more congestion because now everybody's being moved over to this other cell site that's further away. It just ends up being a bad experience for consumers on the network.
Yeah, and I guess the answer has to be that for T-Mobile, unfortunately, making deals with the fiber providers is more difficult than upgrading the cell sites.
I mean, it's not that difficult. I mean, realistically speaking, it's literally like, no, seriously, realistically speaking, when fibers ran, right, it's not like they have to redo the fiber run with their existing provider. All they have to do is call them up and be like, hey, can you just take this at your head end, take it from the 1 gig link, pop it into the 10 gig link, perfect, boom, done.
Oh, yeah. Like, we've all had, like, in our lives, okay, at some point in our lives, we've had, like, a minor crisis where you face your significant other and you say, can this just be solved by throwing money at it? And, you know, every once in a while, the answer is pleasantly yes. You can just solve this problem by throwing money at it and you have the money. And if you're lucky enough for both of those things to be true, because, you know, there are some problems that are not solvable with money. Sometimes you absolutely do not have the money. But T-Mobile, this problem is solvable with money. They have the money. They should do it. You're right.
They should do it. Sascha, I have a phone question for you. Is it time for people to finally, A, turn on 5G on their phone, and B, potentially upgrade to a 5G phone if they don't have one already?
So T-Mobile and Verizon, yes. AT&T, no. Of course, AT&T people who have turned off 5G still think they're on 5G because of the damn 5GE nonsense, which should be illegal. So AT&T subscribers should be on their 5GE, which is not 5G and should be illegal. And Verizon, yeah, I was seeing, I don't know, it's definitely a double-digit percentage lift with DSS now. It is better performance. It isn't necessarily noticeably better performance, but it is better performance. With T-Mobile, turning on 5G, especially if you're in a mid-band area, is night and day. It completely changes your experience.
My apartment, I got lucky enough where they deployed a N41 site like out the window. I can see it. It's incredible. And my speeds went from getting 100 megabits per second on LTE. Now I'm hitting upwards of 400, sometimes even 500 megabits per second, night and day. I can easily see myself using T-Mobile home internet being totally fine with the service that they offer.
And now in terms of upgrading your phone, the most important thing, and I've been saying this all year, is the most important thing is to get a phone with C-band.
How do you know if your phone has C-band? What is that even listed as?
It is N77.
N77.
So you want to look on the phone spec sheet, which is usually on the carrier's website, below the sales. You look at the specs, and if N77 is listed among the 5G bands, you're good. That is for Verizon and AT&T, by the way. T-Mobile doesn't need it now.
Right.
But for Verizon and AT&T, I would say do not buy a 5G phone that does not have N77 right now, because that is the new frequency that over the next 3 years we're going to be seeing all the improvements on.
Yeah, it's like they're going to turn the switch on. They're spending their billions of dollars on C-band. You want to be able to take advantage of that, see the performance, hopefully do what T-Mobile did and go from, good to superb.
Exactly. Hey, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Dish. How real?
Whew. Sasha, bringing the heat. I was not expecting a spicy hot ones video. I think I'm very bullish on Dish. I'm very optimistic. I think they've got an advantage, I think, with the build out where they can start from scratch. They can get rid of the bloatware, the legacy technology. They can start with the clean new 5G stuff. They can utilize ORAN to hopefully plug and play, quickly develop and deploy software, make it more secure, and have it standalone 5G from the start. And I think the deal they struck with AT&T will really help alleviate concerns as they're getting their network off the ground and running with their roaming agreements. So I'm optimistic. Dennis, what's your take on Dish right now?
My take on Dish has been a little bit of a roller coaster, I would say. I want to be hopeful because of their acquisitions with like things like Ting, for example, and what that means for like their back end, which I think is exciting. I want to have faith based off our good friend Carlos, who's telling me like what's happening out in like Las Vegas and stuff like that. And I want to be optimistic, especially now that they have an actual reliable partner like AT&T who's not trying to literally just snatch all their customers, which is great. But on the same token, I need to see results. Like, I need to see them actually deploy a native network, and I need to see like speed tests, because as it stands right now, still to this moment in time, I don't even know what their plan pricing is. I don't even know what they're going to offer. Like, I don't know anything about them. And we have these fun talks where like we talk about things they can do. Like I got a lot of hate for it, but I said they should do a price for life type model for like their plans, which I think would be really revolutionary, really exciting. But I don't know, as it stands right now, it's a whole lot of like, here's the potential of what we can do, but like I don't see the walking happening. I don't see the money outflowing towards that. Like, I think that, what did we say? They're only spending $10 billion for this whole network build out, right? Which is a drop in the bucket in comparison to what like AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile all spent on their network in 1 year, And
I will say it's a little concerning. Their estimated timeline was pushed back from ready end of 2021 to beta 2021, rollout 2022. I don't know. Sasha, how are you feeling about Dish right now?
I mean, so I'm old and I've been doing this a long time, and my Dish has lied too many times for me to believe anything they say at this point. I will be really pleasantly surprised when they launch this network. That is my stance. I am not. They have they have lied and let people down so many times over the past 9 years when it came to rolling out and promising mobile networks that I'm not going to give them the benefit of the doubt anymore. I'm not going to say it's impossible for them to do what they're doing. I'm just going to say that every other time they have promised this, they have not delivered. And there's a certain number of credits you get, and then you're out of credits.
They've depleted their Sascha credit stash.
Here's my hot take. Realistically speaking, I think Dish is in this to be acquired. I think Dish is trying. Yeah, I think Dish is going to try to get their network good enough so that someone else that actually has bigger money can come in and acquire them, whether that be Amazon or whoever,
Microsoft,
or maybe a cable operator. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me a lot of the position of Freedom in Canada, which was so that the Canada has basically 3 giant wireless providers that between them have always had 90+% of the market. Mm-hmm. In the government keeps on trying to create a 4th wireless provider. And in the most recent round of this, it became a company called Freedom. First it was called Wind, then it was called Freedom. Freedom got bought by one of their cable operators, Shaw. But recently the end game was revealed, where Shaw is just trying to get acquired by one of the big 3 operators.
So everything's getting all swooped up into one big carrier again.
Yeah.
Real quick, I wanted to ask you about your time in Canada. What does 5G look like up in the north? Like, what's that been looking like?
I mean, it's a little fake.
So they've got the 5GE. Is that what they're doing?
No, so they don't actually lie. So that's a step ahead. Step ahead of us. But okay, so the Canadian carriers have always had much better 4G performance than we have. And that's in part because in a lot of the country, there really are only 2 physical networks. 2 of the 3 carriers share a RAN. And so those 2 physical networks each have a massive amount of spectrum that they use moderately well. And so they're pretty decently performing. The big complaints in Canada are generally around price, not around speed. But what they've done with 5G is because Canada was really late on dedicated 5G auctions. To kind of keep up with the 5G marketing, the Canadian carriers typically just sliced off a chunk of their N66 and are using like 10 megahertz of segregated N66 just to put a little 5G cherry on top of the 4G cake. Or in terms of Rogers, they're using some N71, but not in quantities where it would work much better than 4G. It's just so that it's just so it's future facing. And if you're installing stuff now, why not make it 5G? But in terms of like real differentiated 5G performance of stuff that you couldn't do with 4G, they just had an auction of 3500 spectrum, which is similar to our C-band. And that was just auctioned off, and that's maybe a year away in terms of implementation. I still think, though, our final results, we're going to still see Canada as on average faster than the US just because their 4G performance was so superior.
Interesting. So it sounds like the Shaw demo of the cameras, that's basically, they're using
Bell.
5G, Bell for the cameras. They're using 5G for the latency aspect and less the capacity aspect.
Exactly. For now.
Sascha, I wanted to get your hot take on iPhone 13. There was a spicy rumor floating around, giving you a crispy flavor in your mouth. The iPhone could connect to satellites as soon as iPhone 13. What was your reaction to this? What are your thoughts on the iPhone satellite connectivity rumor?
So my first thoughts were, I don't see how this works in terms of physics. So a satellite phone has between 10 and 100 times the transmit power of your standard cell phone. They also have these big chunky antennas because they have to be able to see they basically have to be able to see the satellite. and then the satellite is much farther away than a typical base station. So you're talking you're talking like up to 400 milliwatts of power, which is like 100 times the typical power of a 4G transmit in your phone.
So you'd like make a phone call for a minute and be out of battery.
Yeah. Or like we saw, there was an attempt at a consumer satellite phone some years ago called the TerraStar Genus, and it had like 2 hours of use time or something like that. In any case, so I couldn't figure out how it was going to work with the physics, and so I was very skeptical of it. I think Mark Gurman at Bloomberg, who is the smartest Apple leak writer, he's generally a channel by which Apple puts out true information. I think he has the solution, which is that this satellite connectivity would just be for occasional emergency beacon messages. So it's like if you're trapped in a landslide, you will scream as loud as you can for help before fainting, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, I could potentially see a situation based on this Gurman story where, the iPhone just has a special mode where if you are trapped in a landslide, it just uses up all its power and screams at the satellite and costs $5 to send the one message because Globalstar bandwidth is insanely expensive. But, the helicopter rescue comes for you.
Right.
Worth it.
Now,
Best $5 you'll ever spend.
Now, here's the thing, though, and here we talked about this on one of our podcasts, and we were kind of like whimsically thinking about potential here. But what if this whole satellite baked into phones thing was like a play to work with someone like Starlink and get some like true coverage like across the U.S., like basically anywhere you are? Like, could you imagine that as like maybe a play that Apple's trying to go for?
You still don't have the transmit power, and you still don't have the battery life.
I mean, if they're just trying to. Because Starlink's a lot closer than like a typical satellite, right?
Starlink's closer, but have you seen those dishes? Those dishes are still pretty big.
So we just have to take one of those. It's a backpack phone.
Yeah, exactly.
You go hiking with that.
I don't know. I was just thinking of something like for like basically okay, like the California wildfires happened, right, or other natural disasters happened, right? I was basically trying to think of a play where like emergency personnel have like a normal phone that's able to connect to data in the worst case scenarios, or the normal person can connect to data in like a terrible situation in the same way that your phone's able to connect to data when you're in the middle of like the ocean, right?
So this feels to me like a good dongle solution. Like this feels to me like an accessory. And actually there is an accessory out there called the Thuraya Sat Sleeve.
No way.
The Thuraya Sat Sleeve. It's basically a Bluetooth connected backpack for, I think, iPhones, which connects to Thuraya satellites. And like when the phone is in the backpack, it looks like a chunky phone. Yeah, I mean, it feels to me like yes, this is a use case, but this is a use case for a $300 accessory with its own battery in it.
Well, how do phones connect in the middle of the ocean? Like when you're traveling on like a ship, right? Like a cruise liner, right? How does your phone connect literally in like the middle of the Atlantic? Because I know for a fact I got calls and texts when I was in the middle of the Atlantic.
Yeah, the ship has an in-building system, like picocells or DAS, and it's generally carrier neutral, and it is hooked up to a satellite dish on one of the higher decks of the ship.
Okay, so the ship was transmitting at the time. It was my.
It is like an
3G.
accessory.
Yeah, it's like an accessory.
The ship is the giant accessory. You just got to carry a ship with you, Dennis.
The ship is the backpack. Your phone is on the ship, and the ship is transmitting to the satellites. There you go.
Okay. Sascha, on Twitter, I saw you were hypothesizing that this could mean that Apple's iPhone could transmit with terrestrial bands that the satellite provider offered. What's your current opinion on that? Do you think that still might be plausible, or do you think it'll really be true satellite connection, but very, very limited use case?
So I changed my mind when Gurman came out with his story. Because the original rumor from Ming-Chi Kuo was super not believable. And it was all about like what Dennis was saying of like, oh, you'll be able to go out of range and make satellite calls whenever
No
you want to.
backpack required, yeah.
No backpack required. And like the physics of that is impossible. But, and that led me to look into the fact that Globalstar, a satellite provider, owns some terrestrial spectrum that they are trying to use as anchor bands for LAA, and that they're trying to use for private corporate networks. And Nokia sells base stations for those private networks on that reserved band and all of that. And the new modem in the iPhone 13 likely includes that frequency, and that's all still true. Like, the iPhone 13 will likely include this Globalstar frequency, which is probably mostly going to be used by corporate networks that invest in this Nokia hardware. But the bigger question around will it talk to a satellite at all is, of course, the most interesting question.
So
Interesting.
I have a spicy question that was not on the docket, but I just thought of it now. Sascha, did you end up getting the Snapdragon Insider phone?
I did.
And what were your thoughts on that, man?
So I thought, like, why? Okay, so now, like, so if you go to my review of the Snapdragon Insider phone, the entire review is around the question of why does this exist? And the answer to why does this exist is Qualcomm. It's so weird and twisted, Qualcomm's relationship with its licensees, because Qualcomm wants to prove that its chips can do things that its licensees aren't letting them do, without driving any of them to MediaTek because they feel insulted. And that's basically what this phone is for. Like, this phone is to show that there are some things that a Snapdragon 888 can do that maybe other devices aren't doing, and we're not going to call anyone out, and we're not going to say they don't have their reasons for this, and we love all of our partners, but still, if you are complaining about the fact that your phone doesn't have, dual 5G SIMs with true global roaming, don't come to us. It's not our problem. It works fine.
Oh my gosh. I saw the dual SIM hardware and I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. I've got to get this phone. This looks insane. Then I read your review and was like, oh, like the rest of the phone it's just like meh.
Yeah. And it's an Asus phone.
Which Asus makes good phones overall, at least I think they do with their gaming.
Pretty good phones.
Well, their ROG series of phones is like gamer's wet dream, right? Like, it's got
this isn't a ROG.
I know, but I'm just saying, I'm saying Asus is capable of making a good phone is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but I think ultimately what it comes to, and part of it is, so you read my review, Stetson, but I would look out there on the boards right now for some people using it with whatever the software updates were after the review.
Yeah,
because a lot of the minuses in the review were just that the phones were shipped out with super unfinished software.
Yeah, they shipped a half-baked product, and we're expecting people to review. Like, who thought of that? That really needed time to finish baking in the oven, come out when it's nice and ready, and it's smelling delicious. And then guess what? You get positive reviews because it tastes good.
Well, it was already end of year, though. I mean,
yeah. So what I think is super weird about that phone is that, okay, so this is a phone for like Snapdragon fanatics, like people who are really into the latest chipset. Okay, are you gonna sink $1,500 into what is in 2 months going to become last year's chipset with no prospect potential plan for upgrade here? Like, what Qualcomm really needs to be selling is a subscription. They need to be selling some kind of fan behavior subscription where every December, when they announce the new Snapdragon in Hawaii, the fans get a phone with the new Snapdragon in it.
And they're first, right?
And it costs like, $750 a year, and
Sure.
they always have to turn the previous one in. Like, that's like, are you going to be a Snapdragon fan if you're holding this 3-year-old phone 3 years from now?
Maybe not. And what will be the first phone with the Snapdragon? Would it be the 898? I'm not sure the number.
Whatever
iteration.
Samsung.
Yeah,
whatever
what'll be
Samsung
the?
calls.
No, it's going to be something Chinese.
Oh,
No,
the Chinese
Samsung
brand.
has that contract though, where they're the first, right? They have the exclusivity contract. right?
I mean, they used to, but I think like I don't pay a lot of attention to the Chinese vendors because I'm very North America focused. But I think like Xiaomi and their Poco brand, I think they might have come out first this year.
Interesting. Is it weird that it's not the phone for Snapdragon Insiders getting it first?
Exactly. It is weird. It's weird that the phone for Snapdragon Insiders comes out like 8 months later.
Here's last year's model with off-the-shelf extra processors we had.
I know something's just a little off about that whole thing, and they really need to think like they need to come from the perspective of what does a real fan want, and if you can't deliver what a real fan wants, just don't deliver anything.
I mean, a real fan. I mean, they did do one thing right. And that was the fact they did support pretty much every single band on the face of this earth, which was like incredible because that is always
dual 5G, dual standby.
Oh my God.
Right. Because that has always been a problem on Android for the longest time. Like, you know, you touched on it back in the day when we were talking about the network tests. Like, carriers used to make manufacturers used to make literally specific Android phones for each carrier and then not actually include the bands. Then we got to the point where we are today where they'll come out with the same version of a phone, but the firmware will be locked to a specific carrier, artificially turning some off. And it wasn't until very recently that Samsung actually made it so that the bootloader would switch firmware whenever you put in the different SIM card. Like, I don't know if you remember like the S7 days, but if you got like an AT&T S7, you were stuck with AT&T firmware unless you knew how to root your phone. But even now, in like today's terms, like if you're stuck on that T-Mobile firmware, sometimes features don't work if you're trying to, say, use an international SIM card on an Android phone, which is like really annoying.
And they did another good thing, which is that I really like on the Snapdragon phone, I really like the performance tuning options. I really like the ability to run it obscenely hot and fast so that you can't touch it, but it's like pumping the processor all the time, or run it as cool and low battery as possible. And like the fact that that is all exposed to you and that's all explicit, as opposed to it being under the names of weird modes where you're not quite sure what the modes are doing.
Yeah, that was really cool. I really want that kind of granularity with the cellular selection options, like what Samsung has, their band selection. It's unbelievable. I really wish there were more phones that did that. I think that is just so cool and fun to see, and it's probably the reason you use Samsung phones for your tests and why a lot of the people in the network space rely on Samsung to get information.
Oh yeah, that Samsung field test screen is absolutely essential to me. So I've got our guys driving in Canada right now, and one of the new elements I've added to their testing is in each city, when they're in an optimal situation, I'm having them pop over to the Samsung field test screen so we can get a picture of what bands each carrier is using.
That is brilliant. That is awesome.
Hey, you touched on one thing. You said you have your own app, correct? Or were you referring to like the special Ookla app that you were talking
The special Ookla app.
Okay, I didn't know if you guys actually developed an app since we last spoke, and I was going to ask what it was. But
No, it's the app that Ookla developed for us in 2016. But
okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha. Cool. I was going to say that it doesn't matter at that point. But hey, one more question for you, and then I'll let Stetson do whatever he has to say. You're talking about like the promises of T-Mobile, like you really hyped them up a bit in a few of your articles. And I think you tested their home internet, too, at one point, didn't you?
Yeah. I used their home internet as a primary work connection for 2 months.
Here's the question. Do you see yourself at any point possibly swapping away from Fios in favor of like a T-Mobile home-based internet solution?
Of course not.
Not even if the price was right?
Earlier in the episode, Sascha, Fios is the best fiber optic solution there is. Dennis.
Okay, so here's the thing, okay? So fiber is the gold standard for home internet.
True.
Okay, it is. Once more, I'm going to go back to physics. And wireless on licensed spectrum is never going to have the kind of capacity and reliability that fiber does. But fiber can't reach a lot of people. There's a lot, and fiber is insanely expensive to build and difficult to build from a permitting perspective. So I see T-Mobile's home internet as it's not for me who can get Fios. It's for people who can't get fiber. It's for people, especially all of those people who are stuck on DSL and feel like they have been abandoned by the entire internet industry.
I just figured I'd ask because I know you really had a good experience from what I could tell. So I figured I'd ask.
Like if I was on like a 100 meg Spectrum plan and that was my only option, with Spectrum's reputation for awesome reliability, then yeah, I would switch from 100 meg Spectrum plan to T-Mobile. But fiber is fiber.
What does Fios charge you, by the way, up in your market?
I think it's $64.95
for.
I'm 500 megs.
Okay, you're 400,
really
but they over provisioned.
I think that's really good.
Yeah, it's 400 bits over provisioned.
Yeah, I'm gig for 775.
Yeah, we don't need more right now, so
that's the truth
save
of
the
it.
$10. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Did you, by any chance, get to test out the new Netgear Nighthawk, the M5, the new 5G
I am
one?
waiting for that.
Oh,
Ooh.
I am so excited for you to get your hands on that and to read your review.
Stetson wants to buy one because he wants to start testing out hotspot plans personally.
Yeah, because that'll let you. The great thing about that, so that is a really rare, unlocked, multi-carrier 5G hotspot, and that will let you put in all of your weird MVNO SIM cards and see what happens.
I think that'd be worth it. Well, Sascha, thank you so much for joining us today. Do you have anything you want to share with the audience? Anything you're up to next? Any additional information we can throw down in the video description to let people know about what's going on in PCMag?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we've been talking about, my big project recently was Fastest Mobile Networks 2021. We went to 30 cities to find the best mobile performance. Drill down, please, because the big difference between our project and some of the competitors is how transparent we are. We tell everyone exactly where we went to the neighborhood level. You can see maps of exact spots. And so we give you details that no one else gives you in terms of testing. I've rolled into Fastest Mobile Networks Canada right now. That's going to come out in late October, doing the same thing for Canada. And of course, in between, I hear there's some big phones being announced next week. And if you're looking for some information on the iPhone 13 that is network focused and network performance focused, then you definitely want to check PCMag.com.
Awesome. Sascha, thank you so much. Please enjoy the rest of your evening and the rest of your testing in Canada and all of the 5G goodness headed your way soon.
Thank you. You too. Talk to you guys soon.
Awesome. Take care.